It's like Elizabeth Warren. I did the Pocahontas thing. I hit her really hard, and it looked like she was down and out, but that was too long ago. I should have waited, but don't worry. We will revive it. It can be revived.
When it comes, like I said, I'd always love to play poker with President Trump because he doesn't hide his nervousness. Welcome back. President Trump renewed his attacks on Elizabeth Warren this week, including at his rally last night in New Hampshire. Clearly, he's paying attention, but absent from his stump speech, any mention of Bernie Sanders. That actually could be a warning sign for the Sanders campaign. At least that means the president doesn't fear him anymore. Joining me now is John Nichols. He's the national affairs correspondent for The Nation. Always has his finger on the pulse of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in particular. John, always good to see you. Elizabeth Warren is having a moment. Elizabeth Warren, it is funny to watch all my pundit friends go, all right, this Biden-Warren showdown is coming. But there is another member of the progressive wing of this party. Frankly, some would call it the founding member of this current era of progressive activism, and that's Bernie Sanders. Can Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren exist in the same primary and one of them still win this nomination?
Not all the way through, probably, but they can exist for quite a long time, and that's the significant thing about this moment. When I just looked at the poll you had and at some of the other recent polls, it's important to understand that there's about 20 or 25% of people who are saying they are with candidates other than Biden, Sanders, and Warren. So the thing to recognize here is that Sanders and Warren have a lot of territory where they can still pick up support and kind of establish a position before they have to worry about going after each other. Now, that doesn't mean that Sanders doesn't worry about it. He should. Right. But this thing is, I don't think, getting quite to the point where you're going to see Sanders and Warren going at each other.
Well, in fact, they have this non-aggression pact. The concern that I've heard from some is that it'll be the supporters that start this fight first. And that will make it very uncomfortable for the campaigns. And that it'll actually create, the tension will go from the ground up.
Chuck, have you been on Twitter recently?
Actually, I don't these days.
The fact is, it's already there. You do see people pushing and pulling. And of course, that is a reality. But here's where it gets interesting. Warren and Sanders had such a successful debate in that second round of debates. It worked very, very well for both of them. I think it did work better for Warren in some ways.
They were a tag team. Yeah, they were kind of a tag team there.
And the fact is that they both know, and I've been around their campaigns, they both know that if one of them is seen as going after the other, that's a bad thing. Now, you are wise enough to point to where this thing has to sort out. And here I would suggest to you, Chuck, is the genius of the Iowa caucuses. Yeah. Because when you get into those Iowa caucuses, you come in and you sort of look around, you register, you're with one candidate or another, and you see if you've got critical mass. And the fact is that the reality of Warren and Sanders makes Iowa even more important than it ever has been. Because to get to that threshold. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And more importantly, they're both neighboring New Hampshire states. I mean, I think we both know where this is headed. It's sort of like, okay, whoever finishes second among those two in Iowa, suddenly, if you don't win New Hampshire now, you're done. Do you buy into that?
Well, I think it's even more than that. Not only do I buy into that, I think this is where Iowa becomes such a big deal, because Iowa sends a message. Okay, there's one candidate here who's got a real chance to get the nomination if somebody comes out clearly ahead in Iowa.
Sure.
And then that has a huge impact on New Hampshire and, frankly, going forward. There's one other element, though, I'd throw into the mix here, and this is worth noting, and that is among all of those other candidates, many of them have positioned as progressives. And as they don't get positions in the debates, as they begin to fade, as some of them will, there's a real competition for where their supporters go. Right. And finally, if Biden fades, remember, his supporters, a lot of them, their second choice is Bernie Sanders.
Right, they're ideologically more progressive than they are. They're just the folks that do want to. They're in the win first mentality, and have believed that Biden is that. And it gets to me the second part of this question, which is, ultimately, do you believe that for Warren and Sanders, one of them has to successfully make an electability argument to ultimately become the progressive champion?
Not only do I believe that is the case, I believe that that's where this thing is going. I don't think you're going to see Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren attacking each other. I do think that their strategy will come into play with heavy-duty message on electability, who can win. I expect that you may see that rare ad. It doesn't happen very often in politics,
right,
but that rare ad on TV and the mailing that says, here's a bunch of polling, here's a bunch of data, here's a bunch of information that tells you this is the one who can do it. And I think that's actually how they go at each other on an electability argument.
Let's talk about Bernie Sanders here. There's this perception among people that have run races against him, including people that have worked for him. I have heard this a bunch of times, whether they're Sanders lovers or Sanders skeptics, and they say, one thing you need to know about Bernie Sanders, he never quits. But one thing that Elizabeth Warren needs to understand is Bernie never quits. He'll never get out of this thing. You spend a lot of time with Bernie Sanders. Do you buy that argument that somehow Bernie Sanders, if he knows that he won't, do you really think he would somehow be the person that denied Warren an opportunity to be the nominee?
No, I don't. But I also agree with that point that he doesn't quit. And so this is where it gets complicated. Bernie Sanders got into this thing back, remember, in 2015, long ago, when nobody else wanted to make a run, or very few people did. And he got into it with an idea of really, raising the progressive flag. It went better, I think, than he expected. And so not only did he raise the progressive flag, he became a very viable national contender himself.
It's going to be hard for him to give it up, though, don't you think? It's going to be hard for him to say,
it's hard
I made it. I created this. I made the room for you, Elizabeth Warren, and now I'm supposed to hand you the flag? That's going to be hard to hand, right?
Nope. It's hard for anybody to do that in politics. But do understand, I interviewed Bernie Sanders just the other day, or was talking to him about, a lot of political history and stuff of this nature. And the interesting thing about it is he is so hardwired into this idea of advancing the progressive cause, of really getting someplace, that, yeah, the movement matters. And so I think if you got to that point of electability, my sense is that the movement would be very viable. But I really want to emphasize in this conversation, be very careful about assuming that it's necessarily going to be Sanders who has to make those tough choices.
Look, I'm with you. Elizabeth Warren
been down and he's been up.
That's right. And Elizabeth Warren, in fairness, she hasn't had her time in the barrel as a candidate yet. She in the preseason she did, but not as a candidate, so we don't know what she's going to look like after that. And this will be a final response.
And they are both really, I've seen them both in the last few days. They're both very on message. They're really at the peak of their game. And so, again, this is a situation where they can go for quite a while at the peak of their game without really pointing at each other. At some point, though, you're right. There has to be a sorting out if you're going to have a progressive nominee.
John Nichols, like I said, I don't think there's anybody better on the progressive politics of this country and understanding where it's headed tactically and then some than you. Always good to have you, sir. Thanks very much. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.